Recorded Books Inspirational presents an unabridged recording of Beyond the Gathering Storm by Janette Oak, narrated by Barbara Caruso. This work is copyrighted 2000 by Janette Oak. This recording is copyrighted 2000 by Recorded Books. Raised as siblings, Henry and Christine learned true compassion from their adopted parents, Elizabeth and Wynne Delaney. Now, in very different worlds, Henry and Christine struggled to share the love and faith that they were given with the new people in their lives. Now these two compassionate hearts are at risk of being broken. And now, Beyond the Gathering Storm.
Chapter 1. The cold rain and wind did not make for the kind of morning she would have chosen for the day's venture. Though she did her best to shield herself with the borrowed umbrella, it was impossible to keep either wind or rain from penetrating her clothing. It wasn't the weather itself she found hard to endure. The fact that distressed her was her father's having just spent 3 days with her as she carefully chose a new, though limited, wardrobe. Was it to be ruined on her first day and all that time wasted? Her father had not complained, but she was sure he thought the decision-making could have been compressed just a bit. She had been nervous enough when leaving her small room in the boarding house, and the weather did not help. "I wish Dad could have stayed, or Mama could have come with me," she whispered to herself. She remembered her mother's parting reassurances, even though the tears streaming down that familiar face had seemed to belie them. "God will be with you. Never forget that. And we'll be praying. Every day," her mother had whispered. That thought had a steadying effect, and she clutched the umbrella more tightly and prepared to cross the street. She had lifted a foot to step out when she heard an approaching auto. Automatically her head turned, and she paused, still amazed and amused by the noise and the speed with which these modern conveyances traveled. This one was dark blue, with a fancy piece of statuette embellishing the hood. The man at the wheel was poking his head out the open window, obviously for better vision than through the rain-spattered windscreen. Dark goggles covered his eyes, and a long scarf dangled from his neck, threatening to whip away in the wind. She could not help but stare, a bemused smile lifting the corners of her mouth. Momentarily she forgot the rain and her nervousness, so taken was she with the car speeding along the sloppy, rain-drenched street. She shifted her umbrella so it would not block her view and stepped to the edge of the sidewalk. Too late she recognized her mistake. A spray of dirty rainwater splashed over her skirts as the automobile shot by. She scrambled back in alarm, but the damage had already been done. She looked from her dripping garment to the departing auto. The driver thrust his head out the window again to cast a backward glance her way. Maybe he was going to pull over and rush back to apologize. He merely shrugged his shoulders in an exaggerated fashion, then had the nerve to grin and wave. She could not believe his rudeness. This would never happen back home. She was sure her new clothes were ruined, and this man seemed to think the whole thing was some harmless lark. "Oh, dear," she exclaimed as she looked in dismay at her wet skirt. She was to have a job interview in the building just across the street. Her father had arranged it. Had hoped to accompany her, but duty had called and he'd had to leave the city. Now here she was, her clothing a mess, her shoes soaked, and no time to go back to change. "What do I do now?" she asked aloud, her eyes wide with consternation. "I can't—" She shook her head, then started to laugh. "Well, I'll have to. There's nothing else to be done. I guess I'll just have to make the best of it." She studied the street carefully to make sure there were no more approaching automobiles, then darted across, the umbrella trailing along over her shoulder. She was already such a mess that a little more rain was not going to make much difference. She pushed through the heavy lobby door and stood disconsolately gazing around. No one seemed to be in sight, and she wasn't quite sure which of the doors leading off this wide entry was the one she should be taking. She closed the umbrella, placed it in the stand, and tried vainly to shake the water from her skirts. Mama always said that life can bring some nasty surprises, and one has to learn to just make do, she whispered to herself as she smoothed her dark hair back under her hat. Well, I'm not quite sure how to make do this time. She brushed at her coat the best she could, noting that it had taken the worst of the muddy splash, though her new grey skirt also had a dark streak across the front panel. She removed the coat. She could turn the worst where it would not be seen. With a fresh hanky, she wiped the raindrops from her face and again patted self-consciously at her damp hair. She straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.